This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, Daniel, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, my man, you have more big names on your resume than LeBron James. MIT
in tech, not in basketball.
What's that?
Just in tech, not in basketball.
Just in tech, right? Yeah. You know, you look like LeBron James a little bit. I can see it. But yeah, so you got your start in tech. You've actually been in tech for a while, spent some time at Twitter, spent some time at Airbnb. I'm missing one as well.
Google's the other one.
Let me not cut you short. What's that?
Google.
There we go. Oh, yeah. Pretty easy to forget about that one, right?
That's right.
Before we dive into kind of what you have built with Jetify, I would love to learn about some of your early career experience, and how it may even have informed you becoming an entrepreneur and launching the tech product that we'll talk about in a few minutes here.
Yeah, I guess, after college, I ended up working at Google. I had a bunch of friends that were already there, and it was like a really hot company at the time. They had already IPO'd, but it was kind of growing very quickly, and I was interested in learning about the cloud and scaling with big data and stuff like that. So it was super educational for me. And you got to remember, this is before the public clouds, right? This is before GCP. This is before AWS. And so I got to learn a lot of that cloud technology inside of Google, where they had built this stuff before it all became public. But anyways, throughout my career, I kind of always wandered between working at these companies and then working at smaller startups. So I did Google, then I did a tiny startup, then Twitter, kind of all the way to IPO, then Airbnb. Then I joined a healthcare startup as a VP of engineering. So I've kind of been in every size of company, every stage of company, and so it's been super fun.
You were, at least according to your educational background, have been in the AI space since 2001, and that I'm not referring to ChatGPT, the year. What was it about AI? Because at that time, most folks weren't focused on the space. It was still a very niche area that didn't have many products in production that were actually leveraging AI.
Yeah, I'll share with that was a different world. Like, this is before deep learning. This is before LLMs. So it was like, let's call it old school AI.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess back in college and always, I'd just been interested in that question of like, how much can computers do, and can they do the same tasks as humans, and how close can we get to emulating some of what the human brain does, and that sort of stuff. But back then, I worked on some like question answering projects, which ironically now would seem like, hey, yeah, we solved it, right? With chatting with ChatGPT and whatnot. But back then, there were a lot of like rule-based systems and stuff like that, and so it was actually kind of hard to get it to work in a general sense. There were some people doing statistical methods, but it was like kind of early days compared to today. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's insane. Even having run this podcast for 4 years, maybe, was it 5 years now? 4 or 5 years, just a change, right? From the LM era to now. So I can only imagine like how things have progressed since the early 2000s, right? So let's talk a little bit about Jetify. I'm curious what pain point you saw where you said, hey, let me go ahead and create a product that solves this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a bit of a story there too, because what we're doing today isn't exactly what we were doing when we first started. So I'll give you that context. But I'd say we're still in the same type of mission that we always wanted to be in. So super, super high level. Yeah, I guess the reason for Jetify to exist is that we want to make it easier to translate ideas into working software. right? Like it's kind of like the speed at which you can kind of think of something you want to build and then build it and ship it and scale it. Like that should be as fast as possible.
Right.
So that's kind of like the inner motivation of everything we've always done.
Yeah. To double click on that, was that more about, I mean, when you thought about it, was that for developers to be able to do that, or was that for non-tech folks to be able to do it? It's kind of was this a solution that you had in mind for
good
everyone?
question. We have been focused on developers, so it has been, let's give developers the tools to kind of do that software development life cycle faster and faster.
Okay.
And so when we first started, ChatGPT hadn't come out. We were focused on kind of Kubernetes and developer environments and wanting to simplify that whole flow. And as part of that early work, we released a open source product called DevBox. It helps you set up a reproducible environment on your machine. It hit Hacker News like page number 1 at some point. There's a bunch of stars on GitHub. People use it. People like it. But yeah, along the way, ChatGPT happened, LLMs happened, all this stuff happened. And actually we debated for a bit, like, what should we do about it? Like, how do we use AI? Right. Is this real? Is it hype? A little bit of both. Can we add value? Can we not add value? We kind of had all those discussions internally. And yeah, I mean, we did decide to go after it. So our latest product is called TestPilot. It's a AI agent that acts as a QA engineer. So basically, you can navigate a web application, click through it, take screenshots of the screens, run tests like a human would, and kind of save you all that manual work that people are often doing, just kind of clicking around and checking if things still work, kind of like at the integration level, right? So I'm not talking about unit tests. I'm talking about kind of end-to-end work. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go into more details of how we eventually decided that AI was worth the jump.
Yeah, no, I do want to dig into that more. So you mentioned, and I want to make sure folks who may not be as deep into the software engineering world, you're mentioning QA testing. You're automating that QA testing, but what is QA? What were the challenges folks were having? And then now that let's just start there. What is QA?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah. So I mean, when you build software, there's gonna be bugs, right? There's gonna be things that don't work, and so when you're shipping that software and you want to kind of guarantee the quality of it, you do QA. QA means quality assurance, right? So that's what QA stands for. And traditionally, there's a few places where developers and product teams try to guarantee that quality, right? So you might have what's known as unit testing, which I mentioned before, which is you're running code that's testing little pieces of your code, like a little function, a little library, and you run those continuously, just checking that that's working. But then you have kind of these integration level tests. So it's like, okay, let's start the whole system, let's start the entire application, and let's kind of try to do a flow end to end, just like a user would. And let's make sure that works, right? That's kind of like that end-to-end testing. And in this end-to-end testing, integration testing, sometimes people write automated tests, but it is kind of hard. They get out of date, they break. Usually the person developing the feature doesn't have much time to really write those tests. And so you have another team writing those tests. And so it's messy. The other thing people do is you hire humans,
right?
A QA team, to like click through that, through all the flows in the application. But it's very manual, right? And so, okay, you have a new feature, big release, let's do it manually, fine. But like, imagine you're wanting to guarantee that everything always works every day. And now imagine being a human responsible for having to click through the same screens over and over Monday through Friday. Like, oh my God. Right? Like, how boring. Like, nobody wants to do that. And so, anyways, TestPilot is a QA engineer that will use AI to automatically browse the application. It'll take screenshots, use the browser. It'll like actually stand up a browser, and it'll actually control the keyboard, control the mouse, and click through and find bugs. Right. If you've seen, T has a protocol operator. where you can ask it to do tasks on the web, and it creates a browser and it goes do those tasks for you. Imagine TestPilot is something very similar, but focused specifically on testing.
If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI talent salary guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. Yeah, so thinking about that, right? We've got AI agents that are going to begin, carrying out the tasks that humans would normally do. If software has historically been built for human use, does that mean that we also need to implement QA to account for how an AI agent might use the software versus a human?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that, but I'll tell you something I've been thinking about that is related to that. That sometimes I puzzle over, right? And sometimes I think this, right? Like we're all adopting AI more and more, right?
Right.
And let me start with the writing example, and then we'll get to a UI example.
Okay.
Let's say with writing. So you're doing a performance review at a company, right? Somebody's like, oh, you got to do your performance review. And so people expect a long written performance review. And I could imagine in the future, or probably already happening today, people are going to write some bullet points, and then they're going to ask the AI to turn those bullet points into a full performance review.
Right.
What's going to happen at the other end with the manager? The manager is going to be super busy. They're going to have 10 reports. They don't want to read every single performance review line by line. So what are they going to do? They're going to ask their AI to summarize
right
all the reports so they can read the bullet points. And so I think what I'm trying to get at is there's these mediums that we as humans have created for ourselves, and we're having our AIs kind of create that output and then interpret that output. But in some ways, it feels very inefficient, right? Because we're kind of expanding the information and collapsing it again. So the same is true with UI, right? So all these websites, we have UI because we make it easy to use for humans. But if I knew that an AI is the one interacting with my website, maybe there's something that even bypasses the UI, like an API that you can give directly to the AI. So anyways, I guess by getting back to your original question, will we want to put hints for AIs to effectively browse websites? I would assume yes, but I think even more interesting that is we might come up with conventions that allow AIs to kind of use the website in a more, or they access the data or use the website in a more direct way, where don't need to be kind of clicking through the UI. At least for a product like Operator, I think having something like that would make sense.
And maybe some since 2025 is supposed to be the year of the AI agent, and we're supposed to have them crawling all over everywhere. Maybe we'll have more insights by the end of the year, because most of the use cases for agents right now, it's just like, yeah, that's not really moving. From what I've seen, I could be wrong, but it's not really moving the needle that much. It's cool, but two things made me think about that. One is this idea that, a website is part of, it's built for human eyes, but then you've also got things that are built specifically for the AI, right? The other thing was that what happens when we get to a point when AI agents are doing, the majority of a task, which at that point, how much do you need a UI? Right, because the UI is built for the human to make it better. So we'll have to come back. We'll have to come back.
I don't know. Question. Yeah, we'll see in 2 years what's happening.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about is kind of to your point around the pain. I mean, when folks start to use LLMs to write code, it just means a lot more code can be produced. And so historically, if you were using humans to do QA, it's like, all right, well, we've got 100 times more code. I mean, we can't just throw 100 more humans at the same problem.
Right. Yeah. So that is part of the reason why we've been focusing on TestPilot, and I guess we were thinking a lot. I was coming back to how we decided to invest in AI, right? Like we wanted to find an area that help that mission and that audience that I mentioned before, right? So accelerate, help developers kind of accelerate their translation of ideas into software. And so there's many sub problems there. And then we wanted to find a space where we thought the work is repetitive and where people would welcome the automation. And so QA is the first kind of agent that we built. Now, if you ask me about a dream world, I mean, we're a small startup, so we need to start somewhere we're focused on QA, right? But in a dream world, company is successful, we grow a lot, we can introduce a suite of agents that take care of additional concerns so that we help in several areas, right? So QA agent might be one, that's TestPilot. Imagine now a second product called Security Pilot. And what it does is it tries to hack your application, right? And it tries to gain access to things it shouldn't have. And so it's now like a hacker, an AI agent that's a hacker that's trying to find vulnerabilities in your application.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You mentioned, originally we were doing QA with humans, and then folks came along with automated QA solutions, but you all are taking it to the next step with leveraging AI. Like, what's the difference between those traditional automated QA solutions and what you're doing with TestPilot?
Yeah. So traditionally, the automated QA solutions are you're writing code that is specifying what actions need to be taken against the browser, so that you as a human don't need to do those actions over and over in every day, every release, right? And so it saves you from that boring, repetitive work of doing the same clicks over and over every day. But you now need to have a technical person be able to translate those clicks that you wanted to do into code.
Got it.
So that's one problem. And then the second problem is that the way these frameworks work are often a little bit brittle in the following sense. The way you write that code is you will say, find the button that inside the HTML is called submit-button. Now imagine there's a developer working on the application and they decide to change that name.
Right.
They decide to change the color of the button. They decide to move it from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. The application still works. The feature is still there. You can still do the thing. But the way the test is written, it's no longer going to find it. The test breaks, not because the application's no longer working, which is what you actually want to detect, but because now the test needs to be updated due to the way the application changed. So now you're maintaining all these tests. So there's this extra work that needs to happen to maintain those tests. What TestPilot does is like a human. It's opening a browser and it's saying, I need to go click the button. Well, if the button's here or the button's there, if it's color blue or it's color red, it doesn't matter. It's going to visually inspect. It's going to find that button. It's going to click.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because from a traditional perspective, with it being deterministic software, I've got to write new code to account for different scenarios, which is a whole nother, right? But if I've trained an AI model, it's just a matter of seeing new examples for the AI to then learn and then get to the point where it doesn't matter where the submit button is on the screen.
Exactly.
I just know that there's a submit button.
Right. The other thing I'll mention is for this kind of old school automated approach, you still have to think about every test you want to run and write it, right? So you're like, what are all the things we need to test? Like, let me write it. With TestPilot, we have it automatically explore an app first. So like kind of click through, take screenshots of the different screens. And then we ask it, hey, based on all those screens that you saw, come up with the tests, right? And so it will kind of generate a testing plan. And so it'll generate a testing plan. It'll execute the test. It'll maintain the test. So if the app changes, it'll update the test and then it'll report on it. So it kind of does end to end the whole kind of flow that traditionally humans have to do there.
Right. So you get closer to capturing some of those edge cases that we may have not considered when testing.
Right. Or there's a new feature that just got shipped.
Okay.
And nobody's tested it yet. because I don't know, we're shipping fast. Sometimes that happens. You say you're shipping fast, boom, the feature gets out. Okay, well, the humans, they need to be told that that feature exists, and they might take them a few days to come up with the plan and like execute it, etc. The agents just our AI agent never sleeps. It's working 24/7, 365, right? And so sees a new feature, comes up with the plan, starts testing it as soon as possible. Find that bug, ideally before a customer sees it. That's the idea.
Yeah. What would you say to the, let me think about how I want to phrase this. If I was a company, right, and I'm trying to decide, well, maybe I should devise my own AI QA test agent, right? Or do I go with TestPilot, right? What would be the key things to consider if you were, because a lot of folks out there making a build buy decision, and most
Right.
people don't have an understanding of how simple or complex it is to build an AI solution. So I just want to get some context into, what are some key things someone should consider as they're looking at trying to make that decision?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we definitely think you'll come out ahead buying our solution than trying to build your own. I'll get into the details of why it'll be complex to build your own. But before that, I think even the question that will pop before that is, should I hire a human QA team or should I hire an agent, right? And if you think so, I want to do both comparisons. Should I hire the human QA team? So first, that if you don't hire a QA team and you need to do QA in-house, that might steal time from your developers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you pay a lot for your developers usually. You want them focused on the kind of highest throughput to like move forward the features that you're working on. If you do want to hire humans that focus on QA, well, you have the hiring time. Like, go find the right humans, right? You have the management overhead. You have to take costs like benefits into account.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these kind of extra. You gotta build a team. You gotta have a manager. You gotta figure out how you're gonna track the work of each human and whether that's all adding up to the right plan. And then on top of that, you still gotta set up the testing infrastructure so we can run. Because when we do testing, by the way, just to kind of explain to the audience, we don't just want to test that application once in one browser. We want to test it in different browsers. We want to test it on mobile. We want to test it on Safari, on Firefox, on Edge. We're just going to test all those variations to make sure everything works. So anyways, hire the AI agent, not the human. And then in terms of building your own, I think it's a lot of work. I mean, we've been working on this for a while, and it's like the infrastructure to kind of stand up all these browsers in different computers, to run tests in parallel, to ensure that these LLMs work well specifically for the testing use case. We create videos of like every action that the AI takes so that you can later inspect what it did. Right. So you gotta set up all the kind of that recording functionality. You're gonna set up how you serve videos. So it's quite a lot of work for a function that people traditionally outsource. So if you think about most companies that end up having to hire that team, testing's not core to their business. I mean, they need it. They want their product, but they're not like, we're a testing company. You're worried about something else, right? You're, I don't know, solving another problem. And so,
no, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there's always conversation around, well, what happens if so-and-so just creates, in the tech space, in the SaaS space, there was always this conversation of what happens if a big tech company creates this. And for the most part, in a lot of situations, that hasn't been the case. Tech company focuses on something else. It's not a core issue for them. So to reallocate resources to building this point solution, or the solution, I should say, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. To turn that page a little bit, though, but still in the same conversation, I think there's a lot of thought about a lot of thought around, well, what happens if, the same way we have operator from ChatGPT, like, couldn't theoretically operator just be used to go, you know what I mean? Like, couldn't operator?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people have asked me that question. And I think there's a related question of like, wouldn't ChatGPT itself come up with a solution for testing, right? Like, you could also ask that. Look, obviously, with startups, you're always taking some bets. And so, we'll see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is like this: OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they're focused on building general models. That means they're building models that work and solve a lot of different use cases. They are trying to be a platform, right? So they can use that platform can be used for many different solutions. The more vertical you go, the less they'll, I think, will compete directly with, right? So for testing, yeah, okay, go ahead and try using Operator for testing. Well, Operator doesn't run on different operating systems on different browsers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so already you can't do that with Operator. Operator doesn't remember the test cases that you previously defined and run them over and over, right? So, and then the Operator UI is not conductive for you to kind of define a suite of test cases and see the status of all of them and know whether your release is ready. Operator doesn't integrate with your source control system so that tests run automatically whenever there's a change.
Mm-hmm.
So as you go vertical, there's a whole suite of extra features you generally want to develop for that particular pain point. And that's why, forget exactly what we're doing. Like in general, I tend to think startups that are working in the AI space will find success by going vertical on a particular domain, as opposed to trying to go general. If you go general, then you are competing with OpenAI.
Right.
And I mean, good luck.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? You see companies like Cursor, just a lot of companies that, maybe an LLM has some of the functionality. Replit is another one. These code generation companies, and maybe OpenAI offers that, but like, there's also a reason for specialization. And it
I mean,
seems,
Cursor, you mentioned, I think to me, Cursor is a perfect example that you can find success in these spaces where people are saying, oh, what if, the big company already does it? Think about this. Cursor is based on VS Code. VS Code is an editor, right? Cursor is an editor as well. Cursor is based on VS Code. VS Code is developed by Microsoft. Microsoft has the strongest partnership with OpenAI possible. Microsoft owns GitHub, aka Microsoft has the data for all the code from like pretty much every open source software. So Microsoft had the most popular editor, VS Code. It had the most popular source control platform, GitHub. It had data, had the resources, it had the money, it had the partnership with OpenAI. And yet Cursor seems to be one of the fastest growing companies in recent times, right? And so, yeah.
So you mentioned would you consider TestPilot to be an AI agent? And the way I've defined, I kind of take the definition from, the way Amazon, how they defined it is, you give it a goal, but you're not defining the process by which it accomplishes that goal. Would you define TestPilot as an AI agent from that perspective?
Yes, I would, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And it would be helpful, just it's one thing to build software. It's another thing to build an AI agent. How should folks be thinking about how AI agents are built? And you can use QA as kind of to make it more
like. Do you want me to? I guess there's two subtopics I could talk about there.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you're most interested in. One is just kind of roughly how an AI agent works, and so kind of what's the structure of that system and how it does what it does. Then the other topic could be just how do you ensure the agent's able to do what you want it to do, right? Like how do you assess that it's good at its job, if you will?
I personally like the second part because there's a lot of hype about AI agents, but is it good at its job? It's like, nah, I haven't seen a lot of them that actually are quite yet. So let's take the former question. Was it the latter?
The latter, the second one. Yeah. So, I mean, so with traditional software development and traditional systems that you're building, the code that you're writing is usually very deterministic. That means that by writing the code you're writing and inspecting the the logic that you wrote down, you can kind of predict in your own head what's going to happen, right? And so what software developers are often doing is they're like thinking through the logic, thinking through the different scenarios and the different inputs that that function might take, and then writing unit tests that I mentioned before to test that function in those different scenarios. And so you might say, okay, I need to handle 5 edge cases here. Let me make sure they're all handled. Let me write a test for each of them. I can run the test. I can double check my work. I can double check the function behaves as I expect. This is good. Let's move forward. With LLM, you have a probabilistic model behind the scenes. And that probabilistic model is non-deterministic, aka each time you run it, it might produce something slightly different than before. And not only that, but the inputs are not always very controlled. If you're just letting users, for example, just type random English, well, it's very hard for you to imagine the infinity of possible sentences that a customer might type for you to logically think through every scenario and make sure that your agent can handle every scenario. It's very hard to do that, right? And so what happens, in my opinion, what needs to happen, what software development teams working on agents need to do is you actually need to create a battery of examples, a suite of examples. And you should constantly be adding more and more examples to the data set. And so now you can be so in the case of us, TestPilot, what are our examples? There are a lot examples of a lot of websites that should be tested. And like exactly what types of tests it should be generating and exactly what answers it should be giving. Should it identify this as a bug or not? Should it say that this is bug free or not, right? And so we kind of build this internal proprietary data set, and every time we're changing the agent, we rerun it through that data set, right? And we can say, oh, now it's solving X% of cases. We think this new idea, this new feature, this new way of going about it is going to get us from X% to Y%. But we don't just, we try it, then we rerun it against all that data that we've accumulated to see if it's an improvement or not. Does that make sense? That does imply, I don't know if you heard the term human in the loop, but it implies a human in the loop element to developing these systems. Meaning you run the AI, you're trying to get it fully automated, but you're kind of checking the work,
right,
and then figuring out how to improve. Just to give you an analogy, self-driving cars, right? Waymo. Well, if you look in the past, how did Waymo start? Yeah, they've always wanted to automate the driving, but they started with actual drivers in the car so that the AI could learn from those human drivers, right? The driver from inside the car, they still had the ability to remote control the car with like a remote driver, for like difficult cases when needed. And so you have this human in the loop, you're using it to assess quality, you're using it to create more data so that the AI can learn. And slowly, as you make more and more improvements, you're removing more of that human touch so that the AI can do more and more. But I think you need to set up this workflow and this framework to be able to create successful AI agents, in my opinion.
Interesting. And so if we were to think about it, maybe this is getting back to the question around like, how are these things built, right? Like if we have, an AI workflow automation, we've already defined the processes that the AI workflow or the AI automation is going to take, right? And then it may ping an LLM to pull in AI to accomplish the task. But AI agents are a little bit different. So like, what's the process of building, creating, deploying an actual AI agent?
The kind of like the architecture of the agent. So let me touch on that first. At a very high level, there's a lot of details. It's not as simple as I'm about to make it sound, but at a very high level, an agent is using an LLM to plan. So it's like, oh, what do I need to do? Hey, LLM, let me describe the problem. There's prompt engineering there, which means like you're kind of crafting the right questions and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, hey, LLM, help me think through this problem. Come back with the set of tasks that I need to do. Right? What do I need to do? Are there other questions I need to answer? Are there things I need to like make happen. Like, so in our case, TestPilot, when I say make happen, like you actually need to move the mouse. You actually need to click on a UI, right? And so it's like, hey, help me think through what the elements are on the screen. Help me think through which ones are buttons or other things, which one's the relevant button for the objective that we're trying to accomplish. Okay, and now where is that button? And should I click on it or not? Right? Like all of that is kind of like the planning or thinking phase of the agent working in conjunction with an LLM. The second thing that then happens is, okay, let's go ahead and do the execution. So after thinking, after planning, we came up with this action, research something else, click on this button, whatever it is. The agent needs to have control over the type of work that it's doing and then perform that work, right? So, okay, again, in testing scenario, let's go ahead and click on that button. Okay, but now, this is the final part, we need to create a loop so that it can continue reasoning. And so after we've clicked the button, what happened? How did the application change? Was there something new rendered on the screen? Let's take a screenshot of that. How did the content change? Let's capture that content. And then let's go back to our LLM model and now continue the reasoning. So, we had this plan. We decided to take this action. Okay, we've gone ahead and executed the action. These were the results. What then? Is that what we expected? Is it not? Oh, it is what we expected. Okay, let's continue with our plan. What is the next step? Okay, what's the next action we should take? Oh, wait, no, it isn't what we expected. Like, what's going on? Let's reason again and try to figure out the new next step, right? So it's kind of like that loop that is happening. That's in terms of the core logic, yeah.
No, go ahead.
There's other aspects. There's like infrastructure, how we run it, how we, like I said, how we test it. We can talk about any of those, but that high level is kind of like the core, logic loop of an agent.
Yeah, no, I think about how you test your own accuracy. I think is interesting because I think a lot of the fear that folks have today about adopting AI agents is, okay, if this thing if it gets the answer wrong. So I'll use an example of if I used an agent to take invoice data and go find invoice data and then populate that in accounting system, right? If it gets that wrong, like there's an issue. I've overpaid on a bill. You know what I mean?
Right.
So where's the point where, okay, we've tested it, figured out what was wrong. And so then by the time we actually input that information into our accounting system, it's correct, right? And I think that the fear is that you don't get to that point where you get to that second go round and then the final result is actually correct.
Right. Yeah, so the accuracy of an agent and whether you've hit the bar where it's good enough or not is going to be application specific, right? In that, if I'm writing a novel and the AI agent generates a bunch of paragraphs and I don't like them, I'm just going to delete them. I'm just going to rewrite them. Like, what's the consequence? Like, help me think through some examples. I'm just going to tweak it and maybe I'll throw away its output or not. Like you said, if you're in a finance system and there's no human in there, for example, then what if that really messes up my financials? What if you were using it in medicine? What if you were using it to review x-rays and you get that wrong? Now you're affecting like a real patient's life. And so the application of AI, I guess, depending on the application, right, and depending on the consequences of getting something wrong in that application, you might have a different threshold for what the accuracy of an agent needs to be. And so I would think in medicine, the accuracy needs to be much higher than when you're generating text, right?
Yeah, and what have you seen from your particular industry? Because I imagine is it the developers who are using TestPilot, who are implementing TestPilot, or is it some other user? And I'm curious what their thoughts are around that specific. What matters most is what application you're working out of.
So for us, the way we think about it is, okay, when you're trying to test an application, right? There are almost kind of like two things you want to make sure your tests do. One is, are my tests reliable? Mm-hmm. In other words, if my test says there's a bug, is there actually a bug? If my test says the feature works, does it actually work? Right? That's kind of like, is my test accurate? Is my test reliable? The other thing you might be trying to optimize is coverage. That means, of all the possible things you can do in my application, do I have tests that cover all those different features, all those different scenarios, right? So our point of view is between those two. Like if we just say, hey, AI, go generate a bunch of tests and run them, right? Our point of view is like what we really need to nail is the reliability of tests. Because think about it this way, if we give you a bunch of tests and then you're like, these tests are garbage, like sometimes they say the right thing, sometimes, then it's like, it's not really a test. I can't trust it. Like, why am I wasting my time with this, right?
Right.
So that's why we try to optimize, sometimes at the expense of coverage, right? So sometimes our AI runs into some cases where it can't generate the test case yet. I mean, we hope over time we generate more and more test cases. We can't generate the test case yet, but we're like, that's fine as long as the test cases that we do generate, people can trust.
Okay. So let me kind of go a little bit further out into maybe 2025. So now you've got platforms, right, that you can use natural language to create a website. I don't know how to code, but I just use this natural language to create this website. Do you see a future where I could say, all right, well, let me go use TestPilot to just make sure that all of the bugs are worked out?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. I mean, right now we're more focused on like going after the software developments at companies that have QA teams and whatnot. But yes, I actually think as more and more people are able to use AI to build their own applications, right? Mm-hmm. And then you don't have a big company, you don't have a big professional team. Well, how are you gonna trust the functionality of the AI that you use?
Exactly.
So what about another one that specializes in kind of checking that behavior is correct, right? And so that could give you like another system, TestPilot, that can kind of help you verify, help you understand whether the thing that was built, by Replit, by Bolt, by kind of all these different companies, whether it does what you want it to do. And in fact, forget TestPilot for a second. Just think about, imagine you're a solo person. You're not even a professional developer. You just kind of are now able to code because AI is enabling you to do those things. If you had hired a team, you're not technical, you can't read all the code yourself. You hired a team and you want to say, I want to check their work.
Right.
What would you have done? And I think what you would have done is you would have opened the website and you would have started clicking around and seeing if that website behaves as you expect it to behave. If the thing gets added when you press the right button, if the thing does get deleted when you press the delete button, right? Like if all these things work. And that is what TestPilot is doing for you.
Yeah, no, super interesting, because then you enter a world where, a non-tech person, a non-coder creates a website, creates a program, creates an application. Then you go use TestPilot, you find the bugs, and then you go back to whatever you use to create the program or application or website to then fix the bugs. And so you effectively become, well, you got TestPilot, then I'm the pilot, and then here's the actual application.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you create another loop, right? This time between kind of the adding new features and then verifying that they work. And you find an error and you go back and fix it, and then you kind of keep iterating on your application that way.
Interesting stuff, man. And I know we're coming up on time here. However, I did want to leave a few minutes. We're early in 2025. Anything we should keep an eye out for from TestPilot? Anything you want to announce?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, if you want to check out TestPilot, the company is Jetify. Jetify.com is the right website to go to, and then you can check it out there. I would say like TestPilot today is focused on web applications, and right now we don't have a self-serve flow. It's more like we're working with kind of established companies, and there's like an onboarding process. But there's two things we want to do in later this year. One is create a self-serve flow, so that now anybody could come and just sign up, and the examples you were giving, they would require that. And then the other things, we want to expand beyond just web application testing. So can we do mobile testing? Can we do API testing? Can we do native desktop apps testing? Like all the different types of software yeah, and then if you go beyond 2025, that's where I start thinking, oh, we could do security and other things. But let's nail QA testing first, and then
yeah. We'll stop over like this next 12-month time horizon, because who knows what else is about to come out. It
yeah,
feels like
exactly. Who
every
knows?
day
I
is
mean,
like a
you
new
might talk to me
world.
tomorrow and be like, oh, there's a new model that does these crazy things, and now there's robots walking around. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, this has been great. I think we covered a lot of great material, number one, but I think you also kind of broke down this, number one, the world of AI agents, QA testing. So appreciate you being an open book and kind of giving us that taking us to school.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.